Good afternoon, D&AD. I think this is the most desirable slot of the afternoon, right? 4 o'clock. Thanks for coming to see us. Today we're talking about a topic that's been somewhat in the news in recent days, about artificial intelligence. The panel is called Can AI Humanise Us? And I'd just like to quickly introduce you to our fabulous panel who I'll be speaking to today. Before I go on, my name is Laura Swinton. I'm the Editor-in-Chief and MD at Little Black Book. But more importantly, let's meet the panel. First of all, we've got Wayne Deacon, who is the EMEA ECD at Huge. Sitting next to Wayne, we've got Dr. Beth Singler, who's a research fellow in AI at the University of Cambridge, and we're going to get really into what your specialism is, because it's fascinating. And right at the end, we've got Michael Horn, who's Chief Data Officer at Huge as well. So just by way of like a little bit of context, obviously everyone here is probably quite well aware that in the ad industry, biometric testing is quite a big facet of what we do these days. Using various measures to see whether ads work or not, using sensors, cameras to see whether creative resonates. But now some of that technology is out in the wild, and now it's getting smart. So our expert panel is going to talk a little bit about that, the positive applications, the worrying applications, and generally how we feel about it. So to kick off, I'd love to speak to Michael, you're Mr. Data, and why do you think this is a topic that's worth talking about right here, right now?
Well, first of all, I really want to thank Wayne for starting this discussion with D&AD about what it is that a discussion we could bring to the event that would really be different and meaningful about the transformation that's happening within a lot of the work that we do. And huge, for any of you who don't know, a lot of the work we do is creating new products and experiences, whether they be apps or websites or retail experiences that incorporate really innovative technologies. But we realized as we were talking about emotion AI that there has not yet been a public conversation around ethics, around privacy, around the useful or dangerous deployment of this technology, which we're about to put into the hands of marketers who frankly haven't been trained to understand what it's good at, what it's bad at, and what the dangers are. So we wanted to bring to D&AD an experience where creatives could have that firsthand, actually have the experience of being measured, of watching others, and contemplate that before we bake these technologies into all of our apps, into our retail environments, to have that experience of developing their own views on what would and wouldn't be appropriate deployments of that experience.
And so when we talk about emotional AI, what we mean is things like cameras that can detect, maybe micro movements in our faces, what we might be expressing that we don't know we're expressing, that kind of thing,
as well as voice or skin sensors, which determine the level of emotional engagement with subject matter. And so that's the very, I guess, data and technological perspective on the subject. And on the other side of things, we've got Beth. And so your specialism is fascinating. Let me get this right. It's the human perception around AI and what it means to us as human beings. Could you tell us a little bit about what it is you look at?
So first off, when I tell anyone I'm a research fellow in AI, I immediately follow that up with, but I really don't do technology. I do talking about humans and how humans understand technology, and specifically artificial intelligence. I think about the stories we tell ourselves about AI and the conceptions that we have, our fears and our hopes. And I mean, lots of people here will be familiar with science fiction tropes that, every time there's a news report about AI, and even the most simple, small step forward, the image is the Terminator and we're all going to die. And there's a sort of iterative process there of the public perception of AI is shaped by those stories, and then our interest in those stories shapes the discussion. So I follow as an anthropologist, as a digital ethnographer, I follow the conversations that are being had online, where even the kind of the DARPA robots, people react very viscerally to the advancements in technology that they see as threatening, or sometimes they see as amusing, or sometimes they're sympathetic towards them. So there's a whole range of responses, and as an anthropologist, that's what I'm paying attention to.
And Wayne, you're here in the creative corner, although you do have a master's in psychology, cognitive scientist, so you've got a little bit of skin in the game on both sides, right?
Half geek.
Should be in the middle.
Half geek. You're more than half geek.
Yeah, true, yeah. I think, from me, it's, I suppose, like what's interesting is the convergence of technology, data, and creativity coming together. Because I think now we've got to start asking ourselves, how do we design for emotional AI UI? How do we design for interfaces that might be able to read you and change based on your emotion? How many people have spoken to a bank? I did last night and got pissed off. And you want to be able to sort of design future products, future interfaces that be able to adapt visually, narrative-wise to AI and how it's come on board. And I think it's a really exciting new territory in a way. If I was a young creative getting into this industry, I'd be like, conversational design, emotional AI interfaces, storytelling that could change depending on, do I think this ad is shit, or do I think this ad is really interesting, and actually the narrative changes. That becomes next level Matrix thing, or next level sort of C-3PO. You can tell my technology understanding is sort of
the sci-fi tropes have only just begun.
Yeah.
I'm checking them off. So C-3PO.
Yeah, I'm on the C. Yeah. So for me, it's I guess AI is a really exciting field, and I think what's good, and one of the reasons we've done this today is we didn't just want to arrive and just talk shit. We wanted to run this social experiment, see how the creative community feels about AI, to be able to have a proper conversation about it.
So I want to talk a little bit about this experiment. So hopefully you've all had a chance to at least see it down on the ground floor. Maybe some of you have had a chance to take part in the experiment. But I just wondered, Wayne, could you just tell us a little bit about what the setup was?
Yeah, I guess it was, we've been working, Michael's team in Brooklyn have been working on a lot of data sets around how people would interact with emotional AI. Is that a fair way to say it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think what we wanted to do here is, it's really interesting because D&AD is obviously a pinnacle award show. The audience is mostly from a creative background. We wanted to see how people reacted to AI and how people reacted to the notion of being watched by AI. So, if you think about it, there's this cultural tautology that's out there that sort of says AI is a demon, it's going to take your jobs. I think somebody said in 50 years' time, creatives will be out of a job because of AI. And I'm sort of I get that, but I also see the lighter side of how AI could be a great tool, a great service enabler, and it feels like, the next industrial revolution is the information age, and just as people didn't embrace, the photocopier, because they had a pencil, it became a great tool. And I think this experiment was all about engaging how the creative community feels about it, and to give them, like Michael said, a sense of being part of how data and creativity can come together.
And I think it's a really fascinating experiment, Michael, because obviously, so huge, I know you've done a lot of projects that have used this sort of technology, facial recognition, that use a lot of data, but you're still open to obviously engaging in the concerns people have as well, rather than shutting them down. And I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, well, I think a huge is built, for those of you who don't know kind of the ethos of the agency around user-centric design principles. And so from our standpoint, every time that you introduce a new technology, we have an amazing research team, and we have two researchers here actually who led that research in Brooklyn, walking people through this experience of being exposed to these technologies, having in-depth interviews afterwards, to really understand what it is that you inhibit in yourself, or what impact there is on you as a human if you feel that a machine is trying to understand you on this level. So, I mean, I think this discussion is actually only just beginning, and the technologies as we employ them, we're only finding more and more questions to ask as opposed to nearing any kind of conclusions, and this is just the start of a process. I think it's worth mentioning, Wayne brought up will creatives be out of a job in 50 years? Actually, data scientists will be out of a job long before the creatives will, so there's a little bit of like a self-fulfilling or karma aspect of this.
Anthropologists will be fine.
Yes, you'll be
Yeah.
Wow.
Mostly.
50 years is a long time frame.
But I mean, so Beth, I mean so obviously the experience that's been running downstairs is it's almost like a flavor of what your sort of day-to-day is, which is exploring how people conceptualize AI, how they understand it, how it might feed into different parts of their understanding. And so as I understand it, you came to AI via religion.
Yes.
I'm not saying AI is God.
Not personally finding religion and then finding AI, but through studying religion.
But I think that's fascinating. So what was that pathway?
It is unusual. So yes, I have a background in the study of religion, anthropology of religion, sociology of religion, contemporary new religious forms, and then having done my major PhD research on a group that exists primarily online, I then found myself in a postdoc which was more focused on artificial intelligence and people's reactions to it. And basically what they wanted in the job spec was a social scientist / anthropologist who was a geek. So, tick. So I have always been fascinated with our stories of artificial intelligence. I'm old enough to think back to Star Trek Next Generation and Commander Data. You're Mr. Data, but he was Commander Data. And how our understanding of artificial beings, broadly constructed, is very reliant on those sorts of stories. And yes, I do also bring some of my religious studies skills to bear on some of the more speculative versions of artificial intelligence, where people are thinking about the singularity and what the future could look like in a utopian way.
And with your work, I guess, working with different populations, what are the sort of tension points or the concerns that you see the general public seem to have around AI?
Yeah, so obviously in the Western Anglophone sphere, we're very heavily influenced by the more dystopic stories, and they have to be dystopic for there to be stories. Lots of people think, the tendency toward the dystopic, it says something very inherent about us, but I think a lot of the time it just says something inherent about story structure, that you can't have a nice utopian story, everyone gets bored. So that's necessary, and there's obviously dystopic stories in other parts of the world that people don't necessarily pay as much attention to here. So it's also very useful to think about the narratives that exist around the world that we kind of don't notice so much. So so paying attention to where cultural differences incline people to think of AI more benevolently, or they assume that it will be like detrimental to humanity's future or not.
And so with this experience that we had downstairs, what were the sort of, I don't know, Michael, maybe you're the best person to speak about that, but what were the broad strokes of what we were finding and people's responses to the experiment?
Well, there's a certain meta quality to it, which is interesting. I mean, part of what we're doing is we're showing people videos which themselves are about different technological advances and applications. So people are responding first to those use cases, then they're responding to their emotions being actually measured and observed. So also one of our researchers was talking about a person who saw the contempt line. Contempt is one of the emotions which is monitored, and the contempt spiked. And that made her angry because it's like, well, there's this feedback loop that emerges. And I think that's actually exactly the kind of conversation we want to have, which is that sometimes you don't think about how your emotions manifest outwardly. Whether you're a sports fan and, when your team scores, you're like, goal! And that actually to a machine appears very aggressive, right? That if you don't have the context of sports, it appears to be this outward display of rage. And so I think just understanding how important context is has been one of the key learnings and observations downstairs. And unless you've already been in this space and you understand how the science works, as a designer or strategist, that's really important context to have.
And so we're perhaps lucky or unlucky, I don't know. But this week, there have been quite a few stories in the news around facial recognition, around AI and facial recognition, and that feeds into part, at least, of what we're talking about. I don't know if you saw, there's a gentleman in South Wales mounting a legal challenge because he didn't believe the police had the right to sort of, take his biometric data, i.e. his face. There was someone in Romford, covered their face up. San Francisco, I believe the police have been banned from using facial recognition technology. So this isn't the future. This is now.
Oh yes.
I think that sort of stuff is it's really hard, isn't it? And I guess like part of the reason we made graphically the sort of pop-up experiment black and white is that people are sort of in two schools of thought in a way. They're sort of like, they take a lot of the cultural sort of memes and sort of understanding of what they think AI is. It's dark, it's evil, it's surveillance or shit like that. Or they're sort of in the sort of like enlightenment service camp. How many people here use Alexa or Siri or Google even. And I think what's interesting about that is all about what Michael said, context. If AI is out there and it saves like a woman who's being trafficked by criminals via facial recognition, that's a good story. Whereas if a dude is like in a mall or a high street and he doesn't like his privacy invaded, that's a sort of Daily Mail story. And humans, we react to technology all the time, whatever it is. And I think the interesting thing is we're only just starting to have those conversations. Like car manufacturers are now making AI built in so that it can understand whether you're falling asleep or whatever. And if that saves a life out there of like a young life, that's fucking great. But it's really about context. And I think this is new frontier, right? Nobody knows what the fuck we're doing. So it's really interesting.
It's about context and also consent. And as you begin to explore this area, one of the most fascinating things that emerges is that informed consent, by definition, means someone must be informed. And there's such a steep learning curve on understanding that it's not just that there's a video camera watching you, it's that video feed is being enriched, it's being appended. There's AI processing that into identity to recognize you, or into emotions. And so I think that part of this, the difficulty of this moment is even in covering these stories or trying to put a sign on a door indicating what's going to happen when you step in and these cameras are observing you, is we have this very limited window to actually engage and educate people so that that consent is informed. Otherwise, you're not truly getting consent because people don't understand the implications of being recognized or analyzed by these tools.
And obviously, when it comes to things like facial recognition, I mean, you could argue a shopping mall is a private business, but it's still a shared space. And just by the fact that you're in that space, does that mean you've given consent? And I'm really curious, Beth, around from an anthropological point of view, that's changing the nature of public space. That if you're in that public space, you could have, your data's recorded, your emotions, your face, your identity. That makes public forums very different.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's interesting as an anthropologist thinking about the ethical dilemmas. These are the questions anthropologists have had to ask themselves already, that we go into spaces and we observe people, and at what point do we tell our observees, our participants, that we are watching them, and do we continuously remind them as well? Do I go around wearing a badge, say, hi, I'm an anthropologist? And perhaps, that's worth drawing out as well, that there's a lot of debate about the ethics of AI, and as though this is an entirely new field, where actually the ethical questions, I think, have existed continuously for centuries. It's just that AI, I think, gives us a moment of disruption and disjoint to actually start reflecting more on what we want society to look like and what we want humans to do and to be able to do, and where those limitations lie. So it's definitely a good point for conversations. It's just unfortunate that it seems in some cases, not all cases, the technology is now rushing so far ahead of where people can keep up with it. So I know Congress are talking about it, the moratorium suggestion. Is that going to be enough to actually slow down that process around the world?
And I think we've almost seen a flavour of perhaps the debate to come around AI when we look at what's happening with Facebook and the social platforms, Cambridge Analytica, the use of data to target people, to influence democracy. All of a sudden, the government, I know in the UK and the US, not so much in a lot of other countries now, but are starting to wake up to the fact that this technology has a really profound impact on our social structures and perhaps regulations incoming. Can we learn from what's happened with the social platforms and apply that perhaps to this technology and how we might regulate that?
I would say, like, it's really important that everybody in this room who are pushing forward in their craft or their field or whatever is to embrace AI to make it a force for good. Because I think we are, like any technology, you're in a sort of a tipping point where, the evil empire will get it, or like we will get it. And I think what's great is the more people that use AI for good and for doing cool shit that are meaningful and useful, then like it becomes a really powerful force. But we're obviously in a really new field here.
And the dividing line between for good or for ill is very permeable.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and Michael, what's your thoughts around the potential regulation? Is that something that perhaps practitioners in the field, rather than government who don't understand it,
regulation,
we should be more engaged in?
It takes a long time. I think the GDPR just went into effect almost a year ago to the day in terms of the enforcement of GDPR, but we'd been talking about digital privacy for 10, 20 years in terms of what data was being captured and how consent mechanics worked. I think we can safely expect it will be years before there is, consistent regulation of any kind on these types of technologies, except as they're kind of derivative of PII or personal data storage in general. So I think what we have to anticipate is that things like the political influence scandals, we may look back on those techniques as being kind of quaint, in terms of the data applications and the way that they were implemented then compared to what is becoming quite possible and even easy now with a very, very small investment in technology. That's probably the thing which concerns me the most about misuse, either in a brand or political context, is just that it's so ridiculously easy once you've got a camera and cloud-based services to begin experimenting. And I think just as we look at people experimenting with CRISPR for genetic engineering, people looking at other spaces which are highly controversial, this is just an extension of that same kind of democratization of technology for good or for dangerous purposes.
And I guess part of the question about regulation is also privacy. And Beth, I'm really curious because I think the conceptions of privacy and what belongs to me, my feelings, and what is external, that seems to shift across cultures. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely more communal-based cultures where from the socio-economic reasons, more people live together. The concept of having private moments in the way that we have private moments in our Anglophone sphere is very different. And also the conceptions of boundaries between people as well. And I think what's very interesting in my work to look at how people are already speculating on bringing AI into our sphere of potential beings as well. So there's the more kind of science fiction end of the discussion of AI, but we're already having that sort of pack mentality. People make a big deal about the Turing test and when is AI going to pass the Turing test? People fail the Turing test all the time online where they start trying to flirt with chatbots on Twitter. Yeah. So we're very quick to accept things that are not by many definitions beings as beings. So yeah, again, extending out our realms of privacy, what people are willing to give up for various different benefits. So there was a piece, I think the other day, about people will have their body scanned by Amazon for a £25 gift voucher, their entire body. For whatever reason, are they creating avatars? I don't know. So yes, those lines keep shifting and changing, and obviously, yes, there's a cultural context to that as well.
And so, as you said, it's really easy to talk about the dystopian side of things, and I'm aware that I've gone right down that track because I'm a journalist, and that's what we do.
It's fine.
But I was just wondering if you could each maybe talk about a project, maybe something you've seen or something you've been involved in that uses this technology that you have found to be really positive and beneficial for the users, just to sort of flip the conversation around a little bit.
I think, just picking on emotional AI, right? I think it's really interesting now there's products out there that are glass technology for autistic people to be able to read emotions, right? Because obviously if your autistic spectrum, sometimes reading people's emotions is hard, but now it can sort of signal to them to go, oh, that person's happy, therefore I need to react this way. That person's sad, I need to react that way. So there's a huge community of untapped people that have been disadvantaged in this world because of learning difficulties or acceptance, and I think that's really great that technology is now fulfilling part of that. And the car thing is pretty cool. So I think for me, it's like there's the start of like how AI humanizes us in a really cool way to help people.
PTSD is another very common kind of a positive association of people who are traumatized, may have trouble opening up to a human counselor, but who are okay talking to a machine.
Yeah, I have a similar example to Wayne. So, quick plug: I made a series of short films on AI, and then the second one on could you be a friend with a robot? We had a wonderful interview with a woman from a lab where they use small robots to interact with autistic children, and again, they find that useful because they do not have the vast array of facial expressions. So actually calming down the emotional noise is really helpful. And further, they found they actually then find it easier to interact with humans afterwards. So that those sorts of beneficial examples are very useful.
And going back to dystopia, because it's my happy place. It's where I feel comfortable. So obviously we're here. We're talking about it in a brand context, but there is. It really depends who's using this technology, and we've seen things like how the Chinese government's using facial recognition, social credit. Is there a risk that all the sort of amazing, flashy, brand-led AI projects are training us to be compliant? Michael, do you fancy taking that one?
Short answer, there is a risk. I think that when the team and I were talking, and especially around some of the consent issues, and one thing that quickly became clear is that manipulation can take many forms, and the same tools and underlying science that says that, hey, maybe if we made this person more confident, they'd be more likely to buy more stuff, could equally be flipped to say, maybe if we undermine your confidence, if we make you feel vulnerable or uncertain or desperate, you'd pay more for something. And so you start understanding that these can start with very subtle cues, that if I sense impatience, I might act on impatience in a brand context in several different ways. In the same way that behavioral economics, you look at scarcity or urgency as being levers in an e-commerce setting. Add emotion as a layer to that, and it is very troubling, this notion that I could be preyed upon in that consumer context. I think we have to make sure that when our clients are desperate to be, they want to be first to market or first in category or meet this quarter's revenue goals, those are the times when we're more likely to race ahead without proper safeguards and embrace techniques like that could have unforeseen or, God forbid, intended consequences which prey upon vulnerable users.
And Beth, I'm really curious what your perspective is on this.
So my concern slightly has a historical context. So I don't know if people are familiar with the concept of phrenology. In the Victorian era, this idea of studying the shape of the skull could tell you various different things they believed, and Terry Pratchett, I told you I was a geek. Terry Pratchett had
I love Terry Pratchett.
I'm
looking forward to good omens.
Sorry?
I said I'm looking forward to good omens.
Oh, me too. Absolutely. That's a different conversation. So he had this kind of comedic idea in his books about Ankh-Morpork about like a kind of reverse phrenology. So if your personality was not what you wanted, they could like hammer the shape of your head differently and that would improve you. So what I worry about is a sort of too simplistic reliance on systems that are not sophisticated as they appear to be. And we get a sort of modern phrenology where we've already seen there's facial recognition software being used to like characterize people as these people are gay, these people are not gay. And there is an element of that in some of the discussions around facial recognition, and we should be very cautious about feeling that people can fit into neat categories. And actually humans are much, much messier than that, which is good.
I would also add, and I know I've said this already, but like I think, you guys girls, crew, whatever. I don't know what the appropriate term is because I'm shit.
Mob.
Mob. It's like, I think creative people and creative thinkers are a powerful force for good, and I think it's down to us to embrace this, use it in a way that's good and cool, and I think that people-powered AI version of how it comes out with marketers or design or whatever becomes really cool.
And I guess there's a sort of next phase to that, which is, is there a point where this sort of AI can actually support us or support you guys in your creativity and help enhance what you're doing, give you better feedback, help you bounce ideas around because it can recognize emotions?
I think what AI does is like, one of the positive things is, I know you're dark. One of the positive things is AI takes away a lot of the boring shit. Am I allowed to say that? So it's like, it's sort of like, it allows you the space to concentrate on the interesting, strategic, creative elements of it, rather than the repetitive machine task element. And that then allows a creative person or a strategist or a wide thinker to sort of like focus on the really interesting things. So I think that's where AI becomes a tool. And I think from one of the things we tried to do with our experiment is very much like gauge people's reaction. That's why we had black and white and get people's feelings before they went in, because you do come there with like baggage. And I think it's about going out with a sense that AI is about how you use it. And I think if it becomes a collaborative tool, it becomes really, really interesting and really cool.
And just to sort of narrow it down to something very, very concrete, because I know the audience is made up of people who are already working in the industry and also a lot of students who might be listening and think, this is fascinating. I'm a designer or I'm a writer. I feel like I ought to skill up and educate myself. Just for people who are maybe at the very beginning of their career, where can they go and what can they look at to help get them to a place where they might be able to do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know the answer, but like I think the thing is about embracing it in its different forms, and like Michael said, it's an easy tool to be adopted by marketers or brands now, and I think it's about coming with an open mindset rather than a closed mindset. Just as when when film switched from silent movies to sound to color, it's just another iteration of like a technology process. And if you come at with a wide open sort of appetite and embrace it as a tool, another like pencil that you can use in creativity, I think it becomes a cool tool. So I can't answer that specifically. I'm sure there'll be AI universities. There might be AI universities now, I guess.
Well, I would give an answer, which is to say that the danger we run is in bubbles, right? It's surrounding yourself with people who are from the same socioeconomic class, race, cultural associations, and especially in this field of AI, the same thing happens with disciplines. If you surround yourself only with other visual creatives, you don't really get the full spectrum of the type of team it takes to deploy these experiences. So I would say make friends who are attorneys, make friends who are technologists, make friends who are writers, and try to create like a diverse interdisciplinary team that can explore all the dimensions of what you want to create, because we've kind of transcended this moment where a single creative can create a whole experience, right? All these really compelling interactions require a series of disciplines, and so there should be a part of us that is not just a generalist, but also seeks out other specialists to partner with.
Yeah.
And Beth, so I know this isn't necessarily your field, or specifically, you're looking at this anthropological point of view, but from the populations or the people that you're working with, how are people finding this technology and gravitating towards it?
It's interesting. As I said, there's always the hugely dystopic line. So, I get the taxi, and the taxi driver asks me what I'm up to, and I'll tell him, and he goes, "Oh, we're all doomed." It's like, this is the first question. Or I was on Radio 4 and asked to talk about AI assistants, and had prepared this whole thing about how we relate to AI assistants. First question, like, when are we going to get run over by robots? So, when are they going to rise up? So this focus is out there. It's out there in the popular discourse, and it does shape a lot of people's conceptions. But increasingly, I suppose there are efforts at education. I loved your comment about getting multidisciplinary teams together, because that is the best way that people can do research on the perception of AI as well. So a lot of the institutes I work at, we have like anthropologists and sociologists and English literature people and gender studies, and we're trying to look at it from and philosophy and ethics, and a holistic approach to the big questions that AI raises, and how people are responding to it, and seeing that there are many different ways that response comes out. Obviously, we see it there in the literature too.